Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Sometimes people ask the question, and I was asked this recently after a talk I gave, are the Dewa realms and the other planes of existence, are they real? And that is actually a very naive question. It makes so many unspoken assumptions. It's the assumption that the questioner has an idea of what is real, understands what reality means, and that's an extremely nuanced and subtle inquiry to know what is real. It's not something that you can easily answer yes or no. It's certainly the case that the Buddha taught that the other realms of existence were real. When he was asked, do the Devas exist, he said categorically that they do. And he said he knew this by his own experience. Then there's Ajahn Chah's answer when someone asked him, are the ghosts and Devas and demons, are they real? And Ajahn Chah leaned down to the fellow and said, if I told you, would you believe me? And the fellow says, oh yes, Ajahn, yes, I would. He says, well, you're an idiot. So I'd really like to talk about how we construct reality with our minds. What is some approximation or idea of what is real? The simplest thing to say is that what we perceive and experience and what we call mundane reality is a construction of our mind. Now, it's very likely this involves, and I won't say it's certain because I'll get into the different variants of this, but it's likely that this involves some kind of interplay, like a complex dance between the mind and some hypothetical objective reality. I'll say that it's not certain because there are different points of view on what objective reality is outside of our mind. What is it that we are experiencing? On one end, there's a materialist view that says only matter and energy are real, and the mind is not anything but a secondary, they call it an epiphenomena, a result of actions in the material plane. The other end, there's an idealist view that says only the mind is real, and there is no external universe. It's all a mental construction. This is a position that was historically held by some Buddhist schools in India. And it's a philosophical position that is still current today, and there are some good thinkers who advocate some version of the idealist position. My reading of the Theravada Abhidhamma, based on that, I would say that the classical Theravada view is that there is an external world, and there is also mind, but the external world is something that we can never know fully or directly. So it's to a large degree a moot point. It's an unanswerable riddle. What is exactly the nature of external reality? The world we actually live in, the only one that we can ever really touch or know or experience, is a construct of our mind. And if we are healthy physically and mentally, then this simulation that we live in will be a reasonable enough facsimile of whatever the external world is, enough for us to be able to move around in it and manipulate objects and deal with it as if it were ultimately real. And this is reflected, for example, in the fact that people have a broad agreement about the external world. You know, we see and hear and smell the same external objects at the same times. But even then, they're not identical. Our views of the world are not identical. So let's look a little bit more closely about how we construct this simulation world. And all the khandas are involved to some degree or another. First, there's the physical body, the rupa khanda. If we have a human body, we have certain sense organs, and people's sense organs differ. Some people have sharp vision, some are nearsighted, some are colorblind. People have different ranges of hearing, but there's a certain range of normal people's experience of the senses. There's like a human bandwidth of what humans can experience. And even at its best, it's only a narrow bandwidth of reality. You take vision, for example, which is, probably our dominant sense. Vision works off a narrow band of the electromagnetic spectrum that we call visible light. And so there are organisms on this planet that experience a wider bandwidth. Like bees, for example, can see into the ultraviolet range. And they've determined by tests that bees can actually experience 2 additional colors above violet, which we can't even imagine that experience. It's not within our bandwidth. And we all know that animals like dogs can hear higher pitched sounds than humans. So there's a vast array of information out there that we don't have access to. An example of that would be radio waves. We can't perceive radio waves, but if we have a radio receiver, we can turn it on and tune it in and get several different stations. So that means the radio waves are present in the room all the time. But it's a whole band of information that's not available to us. Likewise with the chemical senses of smell and taste. We say some things are odorless. The smell works by detecting molecules in the air. They get into the nose. And some molecules we can detect and some we can't. And there are creatures that can detect things we call odorless. Ants can smell sugar from a long ways off. In Thailand, where there's many more ants than here and many more species of ants, if you leave anything sweet out, or even like white sugar, which is completely odorless to us, if there's a little bit spilled on a counter, within no time it'll be swarming with ants. So the only way they could detect its presence would be, from a distance, would be odor. So we have the senses, part of our physical apparatus. So they're part of the rupa khanda, or body formation. And they are windows on the world, but they're also filters in that they have a range, a confined and defined range that they can't exceed. So they're only taking in a small portion of whatever outer reality is. And we can extend that technologically with various kinds of apparatus like microscopes and oscilloscopes, but in the end we still have to look at the output with our eyes. It has to be translated into that bandwidth that we can experience. So that part of the process is already a narrow selection from whatever the outer reality is. And then that purely physical signal operates on the nerves and in the brain, and then the physical end of it is finished and it's taken up by mind. And the mind's handling of it, of the information, is complex and has different layers. The very first mental event is a vijnana. It's a consciousness operating through the senses. And it just experiences the raw data. So the saying is that vijnana, eye consciousness, chakra vijnana, only knows color and shape. It doesn't know a tree or a car or whatever. It just knows red, blue, green, and the shape. Then that information is immediately handled by perception, sanya. And here's the stage that's the most important for the construction of the simulation. Perception recognizes and identifies the objects and makes sense of the picture. And sanya is educable, it's affected by memory, is that we learn, we can refine our perception. We can learn to be more discerning of certain details and distinctions. Sanya also has an actually creative aspect. It can be fooled, it can be in error in the creation of the simulation. This is shown, for example, by certain kinds of optical illusions where there'll be a gap in the picture. There'll be like a pattern of lines, and there'll be a gap in the picture. But unless you look right squarely at that point where the gap is, your perception will fill it in and show you a complete pattern without any gaps. A more obvious example of how perception has that creative edge is when you let it off the leash, so to speak, disengage it from its strict adherence to the signals provided by vijnana. Is an experience that everyone has done at some point, is looking at clouds and seeing shapes and faces in the clouds. Or that can also work with a fire. You relax and watching the flames, you can see shapes and faces and things moving in the flames. And that's perception. Taking the raw signal and reshaping it, recreating it into these various images. And when we dream at night, we've cut off the input from the sense organs through vijnana altogether, and perception is completely free, and it just makes stuff up. And the result of these, the manipulations by sanya, which are necessary for us to be able to function in the world at all, are then known by the conscious mind, by the chitta. So it's kind of passed back. It comes through consciousness, is worked on by perception, and is passed back to a more fundamental level of consciousness. And the chitta experiences that perception. That's what it experiences in the screen of awareness. The distinction here is that chitta, the pure knowing, is actually not fooled. Its knowing is uncontaminated, free of error, in the sense that it experiences what is given purely. It doesn't manipulate it. But it's only experiences what comes into its screen, so that's filtered through the sense organs and perception. Then you could say there's perception in a broader sense, a less technical sense. Our perception, our understanding of the world, that is also colored by feeling and mental formations. If we feel strongly, if we have strong Vedana, if something is very pleasurable or very painful, then our perception of it, our experience of it will be different than something that's quite neutral or only mildly pleasurable or painful. We'll perceive it more strongly. And then we develop mental formations about things. Our thoughts, connections with memory, emotional states, various theories we might have about things, and that can color our perceptions. So that two people can have a completely different experience in the same space. Say, the experience of being out in the forest, to someone who loves nature and enjoys the outdoors, then that's felt as being a very beautiful, pleasant experience. And their perception doesn't focus on the mosquitoes and the dampness or whatever. But someone who's really attached to a comfortable city life, the woods are experienced as a kind of a hell realm to them. And there's too many bugs, it's too damp, I'm cold, you know. And you know that, from people, that some people love camping and some people would never want to ever go camping, right? It's this different perception. So it's the same space, the same external reality, whatever it might be, but it's experienced completely oppositely. And that's a product of mental formations and feelings. So whatever external reality there might be is only known by us after all this working over and manipulation. We don't actually experience raw reality ever. It's not possible for us. So that's why the Buddha says, when I talk about the world, the loka, I mean this 2-fathom body. Or in another place he says, when I speak about loka, I mean these 6 senses. So loka is the Pali word for the world or the universe. And he's saying it's inside. That's all it is. So there's this relationship in the creation of reality between something out there and our inner experience. In modern physics, in the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics, objects only become discrete, manifest objects when an observer is present. And there's a lot of discussion about that. What exactly does it mean an observer? But the simplest interpretation is that consciousness actually is involved in the creation of reality. That things aren't really real until they're cognized, in whatever sense real means. So there's the idea in Buddhism of sunyata, the emptiness, the full emptiness is the potential, is universal potential. Emptiness is universal potential. And manifest reality is a breaking or a limitation of that potential. The potential is now not universal. It's now limited. It's like anything that's manifest is in a sense broken. It's like a shard. It's a partial fragment. In the Noble Truths, the second Noble Truth is that suffering is caused by desire, tanha. And suffering is dukkha, in its broadest sense is samsara, conditioned or manifest reality. And that's caused by tanha in the mind wanting to manifest an object. When there's no tanha in the mind, then there's no conditionality. And this is nibbana, the unconditioned. So when we ask if the other planes of existence are real, first we have to very deeply question and consider in what sense is this realm real? We can't fall into naive realism that what we see is what we get. It's not a tenable position. So there's some provisional way in which this, more than provisional, there's a functional way in which this realm is real. But there may be other realities that we don't perceive due to the various limitations of our faculties. It's a general rule that the higher realms are invisible to the lower realms, as a general rule. There's a story where one of the Brahma gods comes to address the assembly of the Tawatingsa gods. Tawatingsa gods being second level sensual devas, and the Brahmas are in the realm of form much higher up and beyond sensuality. And the Tawatingsa gods only perceive a brilliant light with the presence of Brahma, until Brahma deliberately manifests a coarser body. With his power, he manifests a coarser form, and then he appears visible to the devas. Likewise, when the devas come to address the Buddha on earth, in the human realm, the Buddha was in a hill, in a cave in a hilltop, and the people in the village down below thought the mountain was on fire. They saw this brilliant light at the top of the mountain, but they didn't see the shape of the devas. So some people have spoken of this principle in terms of vibration or frequency. And I don't know if that should be taken too literally, but metaphorically it does make some intuitive sense to understand that other planes of existence might exist on a higher frequency. And it's just like the radio receiver, if it's tuned to, 800 kilohertz, it's not going to hear anything that's at 1.5 megahertz. So the perception of the faculties of all these complex interrelated faculties that altogether produce consciousness and perception and assimilation of the world are operating differently in the different realms. The Zen teacher Dogen, in his Rivers and Mountains Sutra, which is, you know, a wonderful, brilliant piece of writing, but very difficult. It's in that very cryptic, enigmatic Zen style. He talks about all the different realms as existing simultaneously, and it's only perception that separates them. And he talks about a river that to a human being, that river is clean flowing water. To a being in the hell realm, it's burning molten lava. And to a Naga, it's a wonderful world of crystal palaces. Then he asks, where is the true river? And perception and consciousness operating differently in the Dewa realms, in that they're somewhat more fluid. I like to think of them as somewhere between our waking state and our dreaming state. That they're still bound by some connection to an external reality, but it's a looser binding. And then when you get as high as the Nimanarati Devas in the fifth sensual heaven, second highest sensual heaven, they're called the Devas who delight in creation. Because they can manifest anything they like with their mind. They create their own reality. So they can pull whatever they want out of that infinite potential of the voidness. Or in modern language, they can control the collapse of the wave function and manifest any form that they choose. So we shouldn't be too ready to believe that what we experience is some kind of definite reality. And I don't think we should also go to the opposite extreme and think that it's all just a dream or an imagination. I find the general principle of the old Theravada Abhidhamma view that there is mind and there is matter. I find that intuitively compelling. But in any case, if we're talking about an external reality, we're talking about theory, we're talking about a mental formation. It's only our idea, and it might be right, it might be wrong. All that we really experience, all that we can be sure of, is our own conscious awareness. In our ordinary experience, that's the one kind of unimpeachable reality. Which is one criticism leveled against the materialist view, is the materialist takes that which is only known at second hand and is really only a theoretical concept and makes that the basis for the only thing that is assuredly, undoubtedly real by our own experience. It's kind of putting things backward. It's said by the Buddha in the very first verse of the Dhammapada that mind is the forerunner, mind is the chief. Mind comes before matter like the ox comes before the cart. So that's all a bit theoretical and speculative, but what you should take away from it in terms of practice is to not not fall into a delusional state of believing that what you experience is an ultimate reality. In the Vipassana practice, we try and get down to the bare nitty gritty, bare bones of experience. There's mind taking an object. And if that's done properly, then there's no theorizing about the object or nature of the object. It's known only as an experience of mind. And those are the building blocks. These momentary dhammas are the building blocks of our broader experience.